Welcome to a comprehensive look at Georgia's landlord-tenant laws. Whether you're a landlord or a tenant, it's important to understand your rights and responsibilities under the state law. In this video, I'll cover all the essential information you need to know from security deposits to eviction procedures. Let's dive into the ins and outs of Georgia's landlord-tenant laws to gain a solid understanding of what it means to rent or lease in Georgia. What does a rental agreement in Georgia have to include? There are two types of rental agreements, written agreements and oral agreements. While both of them are valid, both landlords and tenants go with the written agreement since it's physical proof of everything that was agreed upon. Georgia landlord-tenant laws don't require the landlord to include any specific information other than the rental property description and the contact information of all the parties involved. However, most Georgia landlords tend to include detailed information in their lease documents to avoid issues. Here are the most common clauses included by Georgia landlords in the lease: duration of lease, rent payment clauses, security deposits, utilities, landlord's right to entry, maintenance of the leased property, and subleasing clauses. You can find more information about the conditions of the lease in the Georgia Code and Georgia Landlord-Tenant Handbook, a document created by the State of Georgia Department of Community Affairs. Check out the link in the description for more information. What are the responsibilities and rights of a landlord in Georgia? According to the Georgia Code, landlords must comply with local Georgia law guidelines if they want to rent their property to their tenant. If the landlord fails to meet these requirements, the tenant may seek legal advice. Here are the responsibilities that every landlord in Georgia state has to follow. They have to provide a habitable rental unit, comply with security deposit returns and limits, follow Georgia law renting rules, comply with the anti-discrimination laws. When it comes to providing a habitable rental unit, it means that the landlord has to follow their local warranty of habitability. This explains that the property must always be in a safe and habitable condition. Tenants in Georgia are legally allowed to send a written notice if they need a significant repair. In these cases, landlords must answer and provide help in a reasonable amount of time. If this doesn't happen, Georgia tenants can deduct the repairing cost from the next rent payment. On the other hand, landlords have the legal right to collect rent payments, security deposits, as well as ensure the lease terms are properly followed. What are the responsibilities and rights of a tenant in Georgia? According to Georgia landlord-tenant laws and the Federal Fair Housing Act, tenants have the legal right to proper housing, meaning that they must be able to live in a rental unit in good conditions. On the other hand, all tenants in Georgia have the legal right to receive fair treatment from their landlord. Learn more by clicking the link in the description. Tenant rights also allow them to ask for repairs if the damage exceeds normal wear and tear. If the landlord fails to provide these repairs in a reasonable amount of time, the tenant may seek legal advice and compensation for the damage. To comply with Georgia landlord-tenant laws, the tenant must always follow these guidelines. Keep the property in clean conditions, provide small repairs whenever necessary, not disturbing neighbors or other tenants, paying rent on time, and complying with the rest of the lease terms. What are the Georgia landlord-tenant clauses? Now that you know all the parties' rights and obligations, it's time to dig deeper into the general clauses that most lease documents in Georgia include. These legal clauses allow landlords and tenants to keep a better leasing relationship that complies with local and federal housing laws. Rent clauses. It's important to note that Georgia landlord-tenant laws don't mention any rent control laws. Local Georgia laws don't allow rent control in some areas, meaning that a landlord may charge any amount they consider appropriate for their rented apartment. On the other hand, there are no specific requirements for late rent fees. However, most landlords include these late fees to make the tenant pay rent. While there are no minimum or maximum amounts for these fees, there are bounce check fees, which are important to know about. In these cases, bounce check fees are capped at $30 of 5% of the bounce check full value. Finally, landlords are not required to give written notice if they plan to increase rent. While some of them send a notice to their tenants, it's not a legal requirement. Security deposit clauses. Landlord-tenant laws in Georgia don't specify any legal requirements for security deposits. However, most Georgia landlords ask for a security deposit to protect themselves against any unforeseen damages. A landlord may hold the security deposit in an escrow account or a surety bond. If the landlord goes for a former, the escrow account must only be used for holding the security deposit. On the other hand, if the landlord decides to post a surety bond with the superior court, they have to go to the county county where the rental unit is located. A surety bond for a security deposit has to be equal to the amount of the security deposits currently held by the landlord. If the landlord is not running the rental unit through a corporation or owns less than 10 properties, they don't have to post a security deposit bond with the apartment's county court or place the security deposit in an escrow account. Landlords must retain the security deposit within 30 days notice of the tenant moving out of the property. Additionally, landlords have to draft a list of any repairs needed by the property if the tenant decides to move out. The landlord may deduct part of the deposit in cases of abandonment of property, unpaid fees, etc. A landlord may have to pay 3 times the security deposit amount if it isn't returned. Termination and eviction clauses. Georgia tenants have to give the landlord a 30 days notice if they are planning to move out of the property. However, if the landlord is the one who wants the tenant to move out, they have to make a 60 days written notice of eviction. Landlords in Georgia can file a notice of eviction for their tenant from their rental unit if the following conditions are met: non-payment of rent, not abandoning the property after the lease ends, breaching the lease terms, and damaging the rental unit intentionally. If the landlord wants to evict their tenants, they must file a demand for possession eviction claim. If the tenant doesn't leave within the specified deadline, the landlord may file a lawsuit with a state of magistrate court. The tenant can prevent going to court if they leave within the specified eviction period. See our full guide on the eviction process and laws for Georgia by checking out the link in the description. Renewal clauses. If the tenant or the landlord wants to automatically renew the lease, they need to state that the data is in the rental terms. Right for fair housing. Georgia state law promotes fair housing for all kinds of tenants and protects them from any kind of discrimination from their landlord. That protection against discrimination includes disability, familial status, nationality, race, color, gender, sex, and religion. Right to entry. According to Georgia laws, the landlord and tenant may set any notice terms that they consider appropriate for landlord entries. This includes conditions for access and days of notice. However, landlords may enter their property without any notice in case of emergency. Usually, this notice is sent in a written form to avoid any issues between the tenant and landlord. Well, that's a wrap on our journey through Georgia's landlord-tenant laws. I hope you had fun learning about the ins and outs of renting and leasing in Georgia. Whether you're a seasoned landlord or a first-time tenant, I'm confident that you now have a deeper understanding of your rights and responsibilities. And remember, if you have any questions, I suggest that you seek legal advice. Please don't hesitate to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Don't forget to check out some of these videos.